Hi, Brant Cooper here. I'm fortunate I get to travel around the world speaking with startup founders, investors, ecosystem developers. I've learned a lot in my travels. I've got some stories, and I have some thinking that I love to share. Welcome to Brant's Rant. Hi, welcome back to Brant's Rant. My book is available now for pre-order, by the way, Disruption Proof. If you go to brantcooper.com, you can pre-order it at all your favorite retail sites, but I also have some bundles put together at brantcooper.com, and what I really want to do is get discussion going on. So there's a Slack channel you can buy and do some sort of an event we're calling Endless Disruption Summer Summit 2021. So we're going to do an event where, I hope to facilitate some great speakers and discussions around how we apply this disruption-proof principles to organizations. Speaking engagements, keynotes, book club, tools, a bunch of different stuff to hope you can start providing, this new mindset into your organization. And I really want you to be able to do this as much on your own as possible. I think that that's what maintains your company culture, and the DNA inside your company is you got to make this your own. It's not about me, and it's not about moves the needle, and it's not about these big consultant firms. It's really about your DNA, your company figuring it out. All of this stuff applies to startups and where they're going as they scale, and even small businesses, because we have to maintain that balance between learning and executing in order to get things done. So I thought maybe I would jump in to the 5 E's again here today. I've probably talked about this stuff quite a bit, but let's take a pause here and maybe go a little bit deeper on some of these. I think that the most important of the 5 E's, to be honest, is the empathy. We hear it a lot. We hear it in human-centered design. We hear it in leadership training. We hear it by politicians even. It's almost a buzzword inside of large corporations, which is pretty extraordinary development, I think, if you ask me. And it really comes from the fact that people on the edge have the power these days to make decisions. And it's not just whether they're choosing between products, but it certainly is that. But it's also whether to take time to do something at all, right? It's cutting through the noise of all the information overloads. That's a decision that's left up to the edge, is what I call it, right? The people on the edge of the economy. The more we understand people that are making decisions, the better we are at developing solutions that they want to choose. The more we're able to cut through the clutter so that we are able to provide them the value that we think they need, or we've hopefully validated that they need. And so the idea of empathy is that we're not really just asking our customers what they want and doing what they're saying. We're really trying to go deep. We're trying to understand why they have the needs that they have. What are their aspirations? How will it make them feel? How do they make decisions? What their decision-making process is? Who influences them? Whether it's a partner, a life partner, or it's a blogger, right? How do they get their mindset around it? Whenever we're offering products or services, or we're trying to get new behavior out of our employees, or we even want our leaders to act in a different way, they want to fund our programs, we're asking people to change their behavior. We're asking them to do something differently than they have done in the past. And so that's hard these days. Getting people to change their behavior is difficult. It's not necessarily rational, though some rationality plays into it. It's not just time or money based. There's a lot of factors that go into it, including this whole influence and other people involved in the decision making, how people feel. It's very complex. And so the more that we can understand people, the more we can understand our customers, the more we can understand our customers' environment, the more we can understand other people that are involved in sort of this whole larger ecosystem, such as insurance companies, healthcare insurers, not only the healthcare providers, and not only the patients, and not only regulators, right? There are all of these different entities. And the more that we understand their interrelationships, as well as the decision-making process of all of those different people, the more we're able to provide solutions and partner with people and bring the right technology to bear and have the right messaging. All of that stuff becomes important. And the more that we can learn, then the faster we're going to be able to execute. And so a lot of this empathy development is really increasing the efficiency of our existing processes. And this is one of those things that really scares leaders, is that they believe that exploration work and empathy work takes away from execution work, and it doesn't. It actually makes the execution work more efficient. And so developing empathy for leaders, like I mentioned, so that we can understand how to navigate our leadership's needs, I mean, that's huge. This is sort of this, I've mentioned this before, the selfish aspect of developing empathy means I know now better what I need to do in order to get what I think is the right thing to work, right? And I benefit then from understanding the stakeholders in whatever it is that I'm trying to do. I mentioned exploration. Exploration is really all of the practices that we do to find an answer. Fundamentally, the complexity, the uncertainty that we're dealing with, all of the disruptions, the things that come up, boy, it seems like on a daily basis. What a crazy couple of years. And it's just ongoing. And so we have to be able to admit what we don't know. And so that kind of gets back to that vulnerability and self-awareness. We have to admit when we don't know. We have to admit that the best practices that we used yesterday aren't working anymore. We have to admit when we actually tried something and it didn't work. We can't hide that. We need to share that. And whenever we're faced with that, unfaced with the uncertainty, unfaced with the not knowing, then we have to explore. And we're natural explorers as human beings. I've talked about this as well. Children are born explorers, that are born learners. And we need to redevelop that inside of all of the institutions that we participate in. Not only big corporations, but government and education and startups and nonprofits and even really your places of worship if you want. I mean, I think that there's new ways for us to sort of think and collaborate around how do we come to answers when we face the unknown. So that's the exploration mode. Equilibrium is the balance of those. So equilibrium is not only, hey, I need balance in my life by time and space to be able to take care of all of the things that make me a healthy, contented human being, which is important and applies to the workplace. But it's also this idea of, listen, we have to get things done. And I really want to emphasize this part because I don't want to scare the leaders off. We have to get things done. We have to execute. But we have to also balance the execution work with the learning work, and that makes our execution better. And we balance the exploration work with the execution work when we have to start looking at how are we going to create new revenue streams that are 2 years away, 3 years away, 5 years away, 7 years away. And so your level of uncertainty as you look out to the future increases, and so the level of exploration that you have to do increases. Out on the far end in the margins, your exploration work is not, to be honest, not disruptive innovation or breakthrough innovation. It could be testing new business models, could be testing out those fundamental changes that might happen. But to me, really, the farther out you get, rather than trying to predict all of the variables, all of the things that might happen between now and then, what are some practical things that we can do that sort of lay the groundwork for being able to respond to whatever happens in these coming years? And so things like having people dedicated to scouting new technology and learning about how other companies are applying this new technology. Scouting startups, so they're ones that may be applying this new technology, but they're also practicing new business models. And so you want to maintain, participation in those ecosystems so that you're always learning what's coming down the pipe and doing research into what we think is going to emerge several years down the road and how those new technologies might be applied in solving the needs that our companies actually already solve for. And so, there's this idea of product portfolio, but maybe we need to look at a needs portfolio because the needs actually remain rather constant. It's how we address the needs that changes, and that might need new products, but it might also just be new marketing, or it might need new partnerships, might need new technology into existing products, but from the end user's perspective, nothing changes. And so we have to understand demographic changes as well. There's a great example in Peter Drucker's book, Innovation and Entrepreneurship, where he talks about how universities, when all of the existing baby boomers were going to college, all of the university projections were like, oh yeah, look at all this. We need all of this infrastructure for all of these students. And they thought sort of that growth was just going to be in perpetuity, right? That you were going to continue to see this growth. When in fact, of course, what happens is that the next wave generation comes on, and there's fewer students. And yet all of the growth projections and all the infrastructure were only around this continued growth. And so we have to look at how demographic changes are going to affect the needs that we all already address. And then, growing new revenue streams and new growth potentials comes from how do all of the coming changes affect the markets that we're in, but also the adjacent markets. And how can we leverage existing technology to maybe go into markets that we haven't been in before? And so all of those things require exploration. All of those things then require this equilibrium of balancing how much work we put into those depending upon when we expect or when we even need the return on investment or need the new revenue streams. And so that becomes a pretty complex task. So we need to start doing the work today in order to plan out those different horizon levels of new revenue streams. So that's the equilibrium component. The evidence component, I think when people talk about data, they tend to talk about business intelligence, and that's all fine and good, but you can err on too much on the side of, the volumes of data, as opposed to when you're in the exploration side, how do you measure the progress that you're making? And those require really just focused metrics rather than this sort of endless business intelligence. Though I've talked to a couple of larger companies that have, digital products now, and it's really surprising how poor their data is. So this is something else that really needs to be addressed. There was an article recently by the innovation leaders, Scott Kirsner, and he's, quoting this guy from some company who talks about what we really measure is return on investment. But, for the early initiatives, we try not to focus on that. And I had to laugh because, frankly, I think that whole paragraph maybe shouldn't have been in there, because that's exactly what they measure for their startup practices. And even if you do it a little bit less, you're totally missing the point around what you should be measuring. It's not just what are you not measuring. It's like, how are you measuring the progress towards the impact for these future initiatives? And of course, I've done recent rants on the horizon model and how you have to use the evidence in order to determine what horizon they're in, not, this arbitrary level of innovation. And so the data becomes super important, because that's actually how we should be making investment decisions. And that's how we should be making decisions about whether to do A or B, is by leveraging, sort of this concentrated metrics, this data plus insights that we're getting through qualitative interviews and all of the empathy work. That's actually what drives the decision making. And so we're able to cut through our biases. And again, it kind of gets back to even some of these leadership traits like vulnerability. So the leader needs to be able to step aside and say, okay, this is my pet project, but the evidence says we should not do it. So we got to not do it, right? We have to be willing to allow that data and insights to influence our decision. And of course, as part of that needs portfolio, what you want to be able to do is look at across all of the different potential areas for revenue streams, from acquisition to, new product development. And it's the evidence that those things are going to be able to produce this new revenue that portfolio is based upon, not just pie in the sky projections, not Googling, the iPhone market share. So it's really difficult. Startup people do this really well, especially startup investors. And so maybe there's some ways to bring in startup people that understand those metrics as, like EIRs or something like that, in order to help establish the correct metrics, because I find that organizations really struggle with that. And I talked a little bit last time about the ethical component of it, which is the final E. I think that this is a struggle. I think that there's always this balance between compliance organizations forcing people to behave very narrowly and very hierarchically, because then they can control whether, laws are being broken and that sort of thing. And that's all fine and good, except that behavior often runs counter to the exploration work that needs to be done. And so one of the challenges there is that those compliance groups really need to update their processes and provide these guidelines. But also how we manage people's behavior can't be so separate from the work that's being done itself. And so again, I think Agile provides a really great opportunity here, where when you give a team a mission, you establish the guidelines of behavior right there in the mission. Spotify uses this idea of creating safety for customers, and that has to be defined more narrowly than that. What does that mean exactly? The example of the counter to that is the Facebook example that was in the interview with the antitrust congressional task force, where this Facebook engineers are like, yeah, they told us to do anything we could do to increase engagement. And this guy was saying it was just flat out immoral. And we're seeing the fruits of that based upon, the highest levels of engagement are the sort of the most false, quote unquote, news sources. And really because it's that falsehood that drives fear. And so you're really tapping into people's anxiety and their fear and their insecurities in order to increase engagement. And it's unethical. And Zuckerberg should be ashamed. And he should really just, leave. He should get in a Bezos rocket and go somewhere else. There's my rant portion. So lots more to be said on the ethical portion, but I'm going to wrap up the 5 E's. Meet me over at brantcooper.com to learn more about disruption proof, and there's ways for me to be able to come in and talk to your organization or talk to you individually. Just let me know. Hey, thanks for listening to Brant's Rant. If we're choosing capitalism here as a society, then let's make it work for a better world. If you'd like to join me as we redefine capitalism for the 21st century, go to beatcoop.co/D4A. Also, if you have a pressing issue that you're facing in your innovation group, your product group, your startup, and want to join me on video, see the link below. Subscribe, see you next time.